My name is Larry Stevens, pastor at North Star Church, and this is today's motivational podcast. Today I want to talk about, I think, one of the most dangerous things that we can do as human beings, and that is to make decisions while we're exhausted. You know, I see a lot of people around today and they're just so tired. Some people have a hard time getting out of bed. Other people, they get out of bed, but they're just really tired. You know, during this coronavirus, you know, while all of us were homebound, it seems like we should have caught up on our rest, but it seems like the opposite has happened. It seems like most of us are just plain worn out, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. In every aspect of our lives, it seems like we are just exhausted. It is the word that keeps coming back to my mind. You know, how you ever made a financial decision when you were exhausted? How did that turn out for you? Or maybe for some of us, we've allowed our mouths to go unchecked because we're so exhausted. It's like our filter. There's not enough energy for the filter. And then you say stuff that you just don't or shouldn't have said, right? It's happened to people, hasn't it? Maybe it's happened to you. Or maybe for some of us, we've hurt our relationship because we were so tired. Our state of mind, we were just not thinking and we were not navigating through the relationship at the time. And so, you know, we just say something or we do something, we give an action, maybe we roll our eyes, whatever the case may be, and we do damage to the relationship. And I just wonder how many of us have, you know, wrecked relationships simply because rather than taking a time out, we try to just drive through some of these things. And because we have no energy, we just make mistakes. You know, the Bible says something that I think is so important, and I've said these verses many times, not in this context, but in the context of wisdom. It says, be careful then. Be very careful, actually, how you live. Be careful how you live. In plain words, there needs to be some steps in our path. There needs to be a grid that we live our lives through, especially when we're tired, because we will make mistakes. And so Paul writes in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, he says, therefore be very careful how you live. I just want to pause that for a minute and ask ourselves the question, have we been careful how we've been living? Have we been careful about what we've allowed ourselves to do or not to do? Have we been making mistakes that is costing us in many areas of our lives? He says that be careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. He said in plain words, he said, you know, we need to be wise men and wise women, you know, as we're living and navigating through all this exhaustion that's going on in the world around us today. You know, I think one of the reasons there's so much, you know, outrage and backlash over a number of things is we're just plain exhausted. And it's like one more thing happens and I'm going to blow my top. Have you ever felt like that? And so Paul reminds us, he said that we need to live a life wisely, not unwisely, making the most of our time or our days, because the days that we live in are evil, and there couldn't be a better statement than that today, could there? He goes on to say, he says, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And so today in this podcast, I just want to kind of give us 5 things that we need to watch when we're exhausted. There's 5 things I think that we need to be careful with. And number 1 is this, is don't make important decisions. When you're exhausted, don't make important decisions, because I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that in those moments, most of the time, I make the wrong decision. The second thing I would say is don't engage in meaningful conversations. When you're exhausted, just say, you know what, I'd like to pick up on this, but right now I'm so tired, I'm afraid I'll say something or do something that might be offensive. And excuse yourself from that conversation. Most people would understand that. But when you're exhausted and you try to have meaningful conversation, isn't that the time most of us slip up? And so just be careful there. Number 3 would be this, is don't compromise your morals. I think that more people compromise their morals and fail morally when they're exhausted. It's a huge part of the equation. You know, you're pushing yourself, and all of a sudden you get to a place and you compromise a moral principle or a moral standard, and all of a sudden your life turns upside down. Be careful when you're exhausted. Don't compromise your moral standards. Number 4 would be this: is don't push yourself until you break. You know, be wise, be smart about this. If you're so exhausted you just can't go on, then you need to stop. Because I'd rather you stop and recuperate and have your spirit renewed within you so that you can go on and do the work that God's called you to do. And fifth and finally, and I see this one all the time, would be this: don't take God out of the lineup, take something else. You know, when people get exhausted, you know, the first thing they do is they quit going to church. When they're exhausted and they don't know what to do, they quit reading the Bible. When they're exhausted, they quit, praying. And so the prayer life, the time with God, and the time in God's house, all seems to be the first things that go off of people's list and off of their to-do list each day, because they think everything else is more important. Can I tell you something as we close? The wisest thing you can do is to put God forefront in your life. The first thing every day and the last thing every day. And if something has to go, make sure it's something else, because anything else would be far less important than your relationship with God. Have a great day.